Ma'am, this wasn't an accident, the insurance adjuster whispered, after inspecting my husband's crash site. The morning they told me Corden was dead, I was standing in the kitchen in my socks, reheating the same cup of coffee I'd reheated 3 times already, because I kept forgetting to drink it. That's the thing nobody tells you about the worst day of your life. It doesn't arrive with music or warning. It arrives on a Tuesday at 7:14 in the morning, while you're standing on cold tile, wondering why the microwave is beeping. 2 state troopers at the front door, hats in their hands. "Ma'am, is your husband Corden a bike?" And I knew. Before they finished the sentence, I already knew. Corden had left for work at 6:30, same as every morning. He kissed me on the top of my head because I was still half asleep. He said, "Don't let the coffee go cold, Neva." He always said that, not goodbye. Not see you later, just that. Don't let the coffee go cold. The troopers said his car left Route 9 South near the Dunmore Creek Bridge at approximately 6:52 a.m. They said he'd lost control on the wet road. They said it appeared he'd gone through the guardrail and down the embankment. They said he was gone before anyone reached him. Lost control. That's the phrase they used. I remember standing there thinking, Corden has driven that road every single morning for 11 years. 11 years. In snow, in fog, in rain worse than anything that Tuesday. Corden, who used to joke that he could drive Route 9 with his eyes shut. Corden, who never, not once, got so much as a parking ticket. Lost control. I nodded at the troopers because my mouth had stopped working. So I sat down on the hallway bench. I don't remember them leaving. I just remember the coffee going cold on the counter, exactly like he'd told me not to let it. Corden's mother, Marvella Abike, arrived at my house 4 hours later. I want to describe Marvella carefully, because she matters to this story in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. She is 63 years old. She has the posture of a woman who has spent her entire life making sure every person in the room knows she's the most important one in it. She wears her silver hair in a smooth chignon, and she has this way of entering a room that makes you feel like you've been sitting wrong. She founded a bike construction with Corden's father Desmond 30 years ago. Desmond died of a stroke 9 years back. After that, Dee Corden ran day-to-day operations, while Marvella retained majority ownership and what she called executive oversight, which mostly meant she came into the office twice a week, moved things around on desks, reminded everyone who built the company, and left. Corden loved his mother. I want to say that clearly. He loved her the way you love something complicated, the way you love a place that raised you even when it also hurt you. He spent his whole adult life trying to prove himself to a woman who kept moving the finish line. When Marvella walked into my house that Tuesday, she didn't hug me. She looked around the living room like she was taking inventory. Then she said, "You should eat something, Neva. You look pale." That was it. That was her greeting on the day her son died. She sat down, crossed her ankles, and said, "There will need to be decisions made. About the business, about the arrangements. I'll handle the arrangements." I let her. I was sitting on my couch, barely able to remember to breathe. She could handle whatever she wanted. But when she left 3 hours later, I noticed she'd taken Corden's laptop bag from the hallway hook. She said she'd need it for business records. She said it so casually, slipping it over her shoulder while saying goodbye, that I almost let it go. Almost. I said, "Marvella, that's Corden's." She patted my hand. "I know, sweetheart. I'll return it when things settle." She left with it. I stood in the doorway in my socks and watched her drive away and felt something I couldn't name yet. Not grief, something sharper. Something that sat wrong in my chest like a splinter. The funeral was 4 days later. I won't dwell on the service itself because grief is private, and this story is already hard enough. What I will tell you about is what happened at the reception afterward at Marvella's house, because that's where things started to show their real shape. Marvella had arranged everything: the flowers, the food, the seating, the order of who spoke. My name appeared nowhere in the program except as Corden's wife Neva. Not even my last name. Just Corden's wife Neva, like I was a footnote in his life, rather than the person who shared it with him every day for 9 years. I sat in the corner of Marvella's formal living room and watched her receive condolences from 60 people like she was a queen holding court. Watched her cry beautifully in the way some people can. Perfectly timed tears that never smeared anything. Cordon's cousin Rianne found me near the food table around the 2-hour mark. Rianne is Desmond's brother's daughter. She's 38, works in insurance claims up in Harwick, and she has this quality I've always appreciated where she simply says the thing she's thinking without softening at first. She leaned close and said quietly, "Has anyone talked to you about the will yet?" I looked at her. "The will?" She hesitated. "You don't know." "Know what?" She looked across the room at Marvella, then back at me. "Maybe this isn't the time." "Rianne." She took a breath. "He changed it. About 6 weeks ago. Marvella had a new attorney draft it. I only know because my dad witnessed it and mentioned it to me. He felt weird about it. He said Cordon seemed what? Pressured." She said the word carefully. "He said Cordon didn't seem like himself." I set down my plate. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know everything, but I know you weren't left in a good position." I looked across the room at my mother-in-law, who was at that exact moment accepting a hand squeeze from the county commissioner and dabbing her eyes with a pressed white handkerchief. Pressured. I thought about the laptop bag she'd taken from my hallway hook before his body was even in the ground. The splinter in my chest pushed in a little deeper. The will reading was 8 days after the funeral. I drove myself. I parked in the lot of Harwick and Schuler Attorneys at Law on Denison Street and sat in my car for 6 minutes trying to decide if I was ready for whatever was about to happen inside. I decided I probably wasn't, but I went in anyway. Marvella was already seated when I arrived. She had her attorney with her, a man named Greer, who had the energy of someone who has spent his career doing things that are technically legal. She nodded at me when I came in the way you nod at someone you're not particularly glad to see. The estate attorney, a quiet woman named Ms. Farrow, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, laid the documents on the table and began. "I'm going to give you the numbers plainly, because the numbers matter. Under the revised will, Marvella received 65% of Cordon's shares in Abike Construction. I received 15%. The remaining 20% went to something called the Dunmore Business Legacy Trust, the beneficiary of which was listed as one Soraya Greel. I had never heard that name in my life. Miss Farrow read on. The family home, which Cordon and I had bought together, had been mortgaged in the business's name. I hadn't known that. The remaining equity after the outstanding loan would be split between the estate and the business, meaning I would likely need to sell it to cover my portion. The coffee I'd had that morning turned to acid in my stomach. I looked at Marvella. She was studying her manicure. She didn't look surprised by a single word. Not the percentages, not the trust, not the name Soraya Greel. Not one word of it surprised her, because of course it didn't. When Ms. Farrow finished, Marvella smoothed her skirt and said, "I think under the circumstances, this is a fair provision for everyone." She said it the way you'd say the weather is mild. Cordon always wanted the business protected. I said, "Who is Soraya Greel?" A pause. "A business associate," Marvella said, "of the trust." "That's not an answer." Greer put his hand on a folder. "Ms. Abike, the terms of the trust are—" "My name," I said, "is Neva Callum. I kept my name." I turned back to Marvella. "Who is Soraya Greel?" Marvella looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Someone who understood the business." She said it like it ended the conversation. And in that room, I let it. But in my head, I filed it. Soraya Greel. Dunmore Business Legacy Trust. 20%. I drove home and sat in the driveway of the house I apparently shared with the bank and didn't go inside for 22 minutes. That night, I found the phone. Not his main phone, his work phone. I'd forgotten he had a second one through the business account. It was in the drawer of his nightstand under a notebook and a watch he never wore. The battery was dead. I charged it for 40 minutes and then turned it on. It was password protected. I tried his birthday, Denied. Our anniversary. Denied. His father's birthday. Denied. I tried the year he and his dad broke ground on the first Abite construction site, 1994. Corden had mentioned it so many times. How his dad let him turn the first shovel of dirt at 9 years old. How he still thought about that when things got hard. The phone unlocked. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and went through it. His emails were company accounts, mostly routine. His contacts were business connections I mostly recognized, but his drafts folder had one unsent message. I read it 4 times. If something happens to me before I can finish this, or go to the blue toolbox in Unit 44 at Coastal Keep Storage on Meridian Road. The code is Dad's birthday. Don't let Marvella get there first. There are documents. Don't trust. It cut off. He'd never sent it. He'd been drafting a message, and he'd stopped in the middle of a sentence, and he'd never finished it. I sat there in the dark of our bedroom, holding his phone and trying to breathe through the feeling that the floor was tilting underneath me. Don't let Marvella get there first. She had his laptop. She'd taken it the same day he died. She'd had 4 days before the funeral, 8 days before the will reading. I put on my shoes. It was 11:40 at night. Coastal Keep Storage on Meridian Road is a 24-hour facility. White cinderblock building, keypad gate, fluorescent lights in the corridors that flicker once when they come on. So, the kind of place that smells like concrete and old cardboard. Unit 44 was in the second corridor on the left. The padlock code was Desmond Abick's birthday. The lock opened. Inside, a blue metal toolbox, the kind with a top tray and a deep lower section. The top tray had actual tools in it: wrenches, a level, 2 screwdrivers. I lifted the tray. Underneath, a sealed manila envelope, a small external hard drive in a Ziploc bag, and a yellow legal pad with 11 pages of Corden's handwriting. Corden's handwriting is nothing like how I'd expect a construction company owner to write. It's open, loopy, almost architectural. He pressed hard on the pen. You could feel the letters from the back of the page. I sat down cross-legged on the concrete floor at midnight and started reading. The legal pad was a timeline. Dated entries going back 14 months. Corden had noticed irregularities in the company accounts, transfers he hadn't authorized, vendor payments to companies he didn't recognize. He'd started quietly pulling records. The transfers went to 2 accounts. One was a contractor called Dunmore Supply Partners. The other was the Dunmore Business Legacy Trust. I stopped on that name, the same trust from the will, the one that left 20% to Soraya Greel. I kept reading. Corden had figured out that Dunmore Supply Partners wasn't a real vendor. It was a shell. He'd traced the registration to an address that turned out to be a mailbox at a UPS store in Harwick. He'd requested incorporation documents. The registered agent for Dunmore Supply Partners was listed as one Soraya Greel. Soraya Greel, who was not a business associate of the trust, as Marvella had said. Soraya Greel, who turned out to be, and I found this 3 pages later in Corden's notes, alongside a printed email exchange, Marvella's financial advisor's daughter. 26 years old. 1 year out of college. No construction experience of any kind. The last entry on the legal pad was written 9 days before he died. Total confirmed removed from operating accounts. $418,000 over 22 months. MFA signatures forged on 6 of the transfer authorizations. Confirmed by comparing to known samples. Have the originals. Appointment with Brent Hollis at the DA's office scheduled for the 19th. If I don't make it there, he'd stopped again. Just like the phone draft. Stopped mid-sentence. The 19th. His crash was on a Tuesday. I counted backward in my head, there in that storage unit, sitting on the cold concrete floor at midnight. The crash was 4 days before his appointment with the DA. I put my hand flat on the concrete and breathed. I called Rianne the next morning at 7 a.m. She didn't sound surprised that I was calling. She sounded like she'd been waiting for it. I told her what I'd found. The storage unit, the timeline, the transfers, Soraya Greel, the DA appointment. She was quiet for a moment, Then she said, Neva, the insurance adjuster who handled the initial accident assessment. Do you know if anyone followed up with him? No one told me anything about a follow-up? His name is Aldrich Foss, she said. He works out of the Harwick Regional Office. He's been in the industry for 22 years. I know him. He's not a man who says things he doesn't mean. What did he say? Another pause. He flagged the file, Rianne said carefully. He flagged it internally the day of the inspection. I only know because he mentioned it to a colleague, and that person mentioned it to someone in my office. What did he flag? He thought something was wrong with the vehicle damage. He thought it wasn't consistent with a simple loss of control accident on a wet road. She paused again. He specifically mentioned the brakes. The room felt very still. Rianne. I can give you his direct number, she said. But Neva, you need to be careful. If this is what it looks like, you need to be careful. I wrote down the number. Aldrich Foss agreed to meet me, not in his office. He suggested a diner called Patsy's on Route 11. The kind of place with laminate tables and coffee that comes in a ceramic mug with a chip on the handle. He was already in a booth when I arrived. Mid-50s, stocky, the look of a man who has spent decades looking at things other people missed. He had a manila folder on the table that he didn't open right away. He asked me how I was holding up. I said I was managing. He nodded like he understood that managing was the most you could ask for some weeks. Then he said, Mrs. A Bike? Callum, I said. Neva Callum. Mrs. Callum, I want to be straightforward with you because I think you came here for the truth and you deserve to have it plainly. Please. He folded his hands on the table. I've inspected a lot of accident sites. I've been doing this since 1999. I've seen loss of control accidents on wet roads. I've seen brake failures. I know what they look like when they happen naturally. He paused. Your husband's car didn't look like that. What did it look like? He opened the folder. Not to show me photos, just to reference his notes. The damage to the front end was consistent with impact at speed, which matched the crash itself. But the brake line failure was something different. When brake lines fail from stress or corrosion, they fail at a weak point. They tear. They split. The failure on your husband's vehicle was clean. A clean shear on the rear left brake line in a location that's not exposed to road debris or normal wear. He looked up at me. That kind of cut is manual. Someone did it deliberately, and they did it in a specific place to make the failure take time. Not immediate. The car would have driven normally for several miles. So the pressure would have dropped gradually. By the time your husband reached a steep grade or needed to brake hard, there would have been almost nothing left. Route 9 South. The Dunmore Creek Bridge. A steep curve he'd driven 1,000 times. I put my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see them shaking. There's more, he said. Of course there was. I pulled the service records from the garage that did the most recent maintenance on the vehicle. Corden took it in 12 days before the crash for a routine inspection. The mechanic who signed off on the work, a young guy named P.D. Vass, initialed the brake system as inspected and normal. That's good though, isn't it? That means the initial date on the service record had been altered. I had a document examiner look at a copy. The ink chemistry on the date is different from the rest of the form. Someone went back to that record after the fact and changed the inspection date to make it look like the last service was 3 weeks earlier than it actually was. He let that sit. If the inspection was 3 weeks earlier, the argument becomes that the brake line condition could have developed since then. It creates reasonable ambiguity. It muddies the water. But you said it was cut. Yes. But someone wanted paper cover if the cut was discovered. I looked at the folder in front of him. Can I ask you something directly? Yes. The day of the accident, my mother-in-law was at the scene. I watched his face. Did she approach you? Something shifted very slightly behind his eyes. She introduced herself, he said carefully. She was understandably distressed. What did she say to you? He was quiet for a moment. She mentioned that her son had been under a great deal of stress lately. She said she worried he'd been distracted on the road. He paused. She said it the way someone says something they want you to remember. He looked at me across the laminate table. She also asked me, before my inspection was complete, how long the life insurance process typically takes. The diner noise continued around us. Someone's fork on a plate. The coffee machine. Completely normal sounds in a completely tilted world. Before toxicology was complete? I asked. Before I'd even written my initial report. I sat very still. Mr. Foss, why are you meeting with me? You could have flagged the file and let the process handle it. He looked down at his folder for a moment, then back up. I have a daughter, he said. She's 28, about your age. He closed the folder. I flagged it internally, and I was told to let the accident report stand pending further investigation. That investigation has been moving very slowly. I checked the case status 2 weeks ago. Almost no movement. He pushed the folder across the table toward me. You came to me. That changes what I'm able to share. I looked at the folder. There are copies in there, he said. Copies of my inspection notes, the brake line analysis, the document examiner's findings on the altered service record, and my formal flag summary. Everything's dated. Everything's documented. I put my hand on the folder. What do I do with this? You find a good attorney, he said. And you find out who had access to that vehicle in the 12 days between the legitimate service date and the crash. He left first, left his coffee half finished, left a $10 bill on the table, put on his coat, and walked out without looking back. Like a man who had done the thing he needed to do and could now move forward. I sat there alone for a while, copied brake line reports, altered service records, a clean shear in a specific, deliberate location. 12 days. Marvella had known which garage Corden used. She'd been part of the business for 30 years. She knew his routine better than almost anyone. I picked up the folder and put it in my bag next to the documents from the storage unit. Then I paid for my coffee and drove to find a lawyer. Her name was Odessa Quint, and she worked out of a 2-story brick building on Callaway Avenue that had her name on the door in plain black letters. No flourish. Rianne had recommended her. She said, Odessa Quint is the kind of woman who prepares for every possible outcome before she walks into a room. She also genuinely does not like people who hurt other people, which in a lawyer is useful. She was 51, with short natural hair going silver at the temples, and the quality of complete attention that some people are born with, and most never develop. She listened to everything I laid out without interrupting. The storage unit, the timeline, the $418,000, Soraya Greel, the Dunmore Supply Partners shell, the will changes, Aldrich Foss and his folder, the altered service records. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Tell me about the laptop. The laptop? You said Marvella took his laptop bag the day he died. Yes. Did Corden back anything up? Cloud storage, external drives, email attachments? I thought about it. He was careful. He had this thing about documentation. I touched the strap of my bag where the storage unit documents were. He sent copies of everything to himself. He printed things out. He backed things up the way some people make extra keys for their house. So the hard drive from the storage unit should have copies of everything he collected. She nodded. That's good. We don't need the laptop. She tapped her pen on the desk. The altered service record is significant. That's not Marvella sitting at a kitchen table forging something. That requires access to the garage. It requires either someone on the inside or someone who went in after hours. I thought about what Aldrich Foss had said. Find out who had access to that vehicle in the 12 days between the legitimate service date and the crash. Odessa. The garage would have security footage. She was already writing something down. Yes, it would. The garage was called Termont Auto Service. It was on the south side of Barwick, a medium-sized operation with 6 bays and a small waiting room with plastic chairs and a mounted TV that was always on the local weather. Corden had used them for 4 years. I went in person. I didn't call ahead. Odessa had advised this. She said call ahead gives people time to decide what they want to tell you. Walk-in means you see the real reaction. The man at the front desk was the owner, Garrett Termont, late 50s, your oil under his fingernails, the look of someone who had built something with his hands and was proud of it. He recognized my name when I said it. His face did something uncomfortable. I was sorry about Corden, he said. He was a good customer, good man. Thank you. I put my hands on the counter. Mr. Termont, I have some questions about the service record from his last visit. His expression shifted. Just slightly. What kind of questions? The inspection date on the record appears to have been altered. I've had a document examiner confirm it. I'm trying to understand how that would have happened. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Someone came in." I kept my face steady. "Tell me." He rubbed the back of his neck. "About a week after Corden brought the car in, his mother came. Said she was coordinating insurance paperwork. She had a card with the business name on it. She said she needed to make a small correction to the service date, that there had been an administrative error. She was very—" he searched for the word. "Authoritative. She spoke to my front desk girl like it was a perfectly normal request." "And your front desk girl let her make the change?" "She should have called me. She knows that now." His jaw was tight. I didn't know about it until the insurance adjuster flagged the file. By then, he stopped. By then, the original was gone? The original paper record, yes, but, he hesitated. Mr. Termont. He made a decision. I watched him make it. We have a digital log. Secondary system doesn't overwrite, just accumulates. How my brother-in-law set it up 3 years ago because we had a billing dispute with a fleet account and we needed to prove our dates. Most people don't know it's there. He looked at me. It has the original service date. Corden's car. Brakes inspected and documented clean. 12 days before the accident. Do you still have external security footage from that week? He nodded slowly. I keep 60 days. I put Odessa Quint's card on the counter. Her office will be in touch today, I said. Please don't delete anything. He picked up the card. I won't. He looked up at me. She came in here and stood at that counter and altered records about a dead man. His voice had gone flat and hard. Tell your lawyer to call me directly. I'll give her everything. I'm going to stop here for a second because I want to be honest with you about where I was emotionally during all of this. People picture revenge as something clean. You find the evidence. You get the lawyer. You march toward justice with your chin up and your hands steady. That's not what it felt like. It felt like grief and fury braided together so tightly I couldn't separate them. It felt like being underwater and trying to do complex math. Some mornings I sat on the bathroom floor before getting up because standing up required a decision, and I didn't have decisions left. My friend Bettina, who I've known since we were 11 years old, and who drove 4 hours to stay with me the week after the accident, brought me soup I didn't eat and sat with me in silence when I couldn't talk. She is the kind of person who doesn't try to fill silence with comfort words. She just sits. I cannot tell you what that was worth. I also want to be honest about the doubt, because there were nights when I lay in the dark in the bed I used to share with Corden, and the doubt came in. What if I was wrong? What if grief was making me see patterns that weren't there? What if Marvella was just a hard woman who loved her son in her damaged way, and all of this was coincidence and pain twisting itself into a story because stories are easier than randomness? And then I would get up and read the last entry of Corden's legal pad again. If I don't make it there, he knew. He knew something might happen before he reached that meeting. That's not grief making shapes in the dark. That's a man who understood the danger he was in and documented everything anyway, because he was thorough down to his bones, and he loved what his father had built, and he wasn't going to let it disappear without a record. I owed him the finish line. The Termont security footage was 10 days old when Odessa obtained it. Clear enough. Marvella's silver Lexus in the Termont Auto Service parking lot at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days after Corden's legitimate service appointment. The garage closed at 7. She had a key, as it turned out, to the service bay. Corden had given his parents a spare years ago when his father used to bring the company trucks in and sometimes needed after-hours access for fleet situations. She'd kept the key without Corden knowing she still had it. The footage showed her going in through the side door, in staying for 31 minutes, leaving. Corden's car was the only vehicle in the bay that night. Odessa sent the footage to a forensic analyst, along with Aldrich Foss's brake line documentation and the Termont digital service log. She also contacted the DA's office and asked for an urgent meeting, not with just any prosecutor, with the specific assistant DA who handles financial crimes and wrongful death cases in the district. The meeting was set. Meanwhile, Marvella had gone quiet. She'd called me twice in the weeks since the will reading, both times leaving voicemails that were warm and slightly pointed, asking if I'd had time to review the will terms and whether I'd be willing to discuss a clean resolution regarding my shares. I hadn't returned the calls. The life insurance company had also been in contact, so the primary beneficiary on Corden's policy had been changed 5 weeks before his death, from me to Marvella. I discovered this when I called to inquire about the claim status, and the representative paused and said, "Ma'am, you're listed as a secondary beneficiary. The primary is a Marvella Abike." 5 weeks before. 1 week before he started the legal pad timeline entries. I think about that sequencing. I think about Corden sitting somewhere, in the office or at home at his desk, beginning to understand what was being done to his company, beginning to gather evidence, beginning to see the shape of the danger he was in, and at the same time, someone changing his insurance beneficiary, someone already arranging for his value to flow elsewhere when he was gone. I think about him kissing the top of my head on Tuesday morning. "Don't let the coffee go cold." I don't think he knew that morning. I think if he'd known that morning, he would have said something different. Or maybe not. Maybe he would have held it, the way he held everything, carefully, not wanting to frighten me, before he was ready to act. The board meeting happened on a Wednesday morning in March. Marvella had called it. A transition meeting, she called it, to address the change in company leadership following Corden's death. She sent the notice to the 4 board members, to her attorney Greer, and to me as minority shareholder. I had not told her what was coming. Neither had Odessa. I dressed carefully that morning, not for performance. I just needed to feel like myself. I wore a dark green jacket I'd bought last spring that Corden had said made me look like I was the person in charge of something. I put his watch in my pocket, the one from his nightstand that he never wore. He'd inherited it from his father. I put my hand over it for a moment before I left the house. Marvella was already seated at the head of the conference table when I arrived, Greer beside her, 2 board members across. The table was polished oak, the same table where Corden had sat for the past 11 years running operations. Marvella's expression when I walked in was carefully neutral. She'd expected this to be simple. Sign the shares over. Accept the settlement figure her attorney had prepared. Walk away and let the business she and her son had been so different about stay with blood. She had not expected Odessa Quint to walk in behind me. She had not expected the woman beside Odessa, who was the assistant district attorney for the county, one Faye Menon, who had sharp eyes and a quiet economy of movement that told you she had been in a lot of rooms and was rarely surprised by anything in them. Marvella's carefully neutral expression developed a fracture. She said, "This is a private board meeting." Odessa said, "It was. We've added some items to the agenda." Greer was already leaning over to Marvella and murmuring. She held up one hand to stop him without looking at him. Her eyes were on Faye Menon's face. "What is this?" Marvella said. Odessa set a bound folder on the table, then another, then a third. "The first folder," she said, "contains the financial audit of Abike construction accounts for the past 23 months. It documents 41 unauthorized transfers totaling $418,000 to 2 accounts, Dunmore Supply Partners and the Dunmore Business Legacy Trust, both of which are connected to your financial advisor's daughter, who you positioned as a 20% beneficiary in your son's revised will." She let that land. The second folder contains a forensic document analysis of the altered service record from Termont Auto Service, along with security footage from their parking lot showing your vehicle entering the garage after hours, 3 days after your son's legitimate service appointment, and 4 days before his death. The room was very quiet. One of the board members, a man named Harold Peach, who'd been with the company since Desmond's time, now had gone pale and still. The third folder is the brake line analysis prepared by certified insurance investigator Aldrich Foss, documenting a clean manual shear on your son's rear left brake line, inconsistent with any natural failure mode and consistent with deliberate tampering. Marvella had not moved. She was very, very still, the way something is still right before it moves fast. Additionally, Odessa continued, the life insurance beneficiary change made 5 weeks before Cordon's death has been flagged for review given these findings, and the revised will is being formally contested on grounds of coercion given evidence that Cordon was being pressured during the period of its signing. Greer said, "This is completely—" and Marvella put her hand on his arm. She looked at me. For the first time in 9 years. She looked at me without the assessment in her eyes, without the measurement, without the constant quiet scorekeeping of whether I was enough for what she'd built. She just looked at me, like I was something she hadn't accounted for. She said, "You have no idea what it takes to build something." I said, "I know what it takes to protect it." Faye Menon spoke for the first time. "Ms. Abick, I'd like to speak with you privately." Marvella looked at the folders on the table. At the board members, Harold Peach and the others, who were reading. At Greer, who had gone the color of old paper. She said, "I want my attorney." "Of course," Faye Menon said. "You may call whoever you'd like." She was escorted from the room by Faye Menon's associate. She walked with her chin up and her shoulders back, her silver chignon perfect, her coat exactly right, the way she always entered rooms. But this was an exit, not an entrance, and she knew it. I won't pretend the aftermath was clean or fast or without its difficult months. Legal processes are slow and grinding and full of moments where everything hangs on a document that's delayed or a calendar that doesn't cooperate. I want to be honest about that, but I also want to tell you what happened, because Cordon spent 14 months building a record, and he deserved someone to see it through. Marvella was charged with financial fraud, conspiracy, and a charge related to the vehicle tampering that I won't name specifically here because it is still ongoing, and my attorney has advised care with language. I will say the charge reflects what was done. The Dunmore Business Legacy Trust was dissolved under court order. The 20% that had been directed to Soraya Greel was absorbed back into the estate. Soraya Greel, for what it's worth, was a genuinely unknowing participant. She was 26, and she'd signed documents her mother asked her to sign without fully understanding what she was signing. She provided a full statement to investigators. The life insurance claim was restored to me after the beneficiary change was ruled a product of fraud. The will was successfully contested. The coercion evidence, which included a witness statement from Cordon's cousin Rian's father, who had been present at the signing, established that Cordon had not been a free agent when that document was drafted. I now hold majority interest in Abick Construction. This was not something I expected or planned for. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what the right thing was to do with it. In the end, I kept it. I hired an operations manager who had worked with Cordon for 6 years and knew the company better than almost anyone. I come to the board meetings. I ask questions Cordon would have asked. I learn the things I need to learn. There's a photo of Desmond DeBike on the wall of the main conference room, the one taken the day they broke ground on their first project. He's holding a shovel and squinting into the sun and grinning like a man who just saw the whole future opening up in front of him. Cordon told me that story so many times. How his dad let him turn the first shovel of dirt at 9 years old. I look at that photo every time I'm in that room. The crash site on Route 9 South has been repaired. New guardrail. See fresh paint on the curve markers. The road department came out sometime in the fall and made it look like nothing had happened there. I drove out there on a Sunday morning in early April. The kind of morning that can't make up its mind, Clouds pulling apart and coming back together, sun coming through in long, uncertain beams. I parked on the shoulder above the embankment and walked to the guardrail. I put my hand on the new metal. Cold, solid, already starting to rust slightly at the bolts where spring moisture had gotten in. I didn't say anything out loud. I'm not someone who talks to empty air and expects it to carry words somewhere, but I stood there for a while, long enough to feel something settle. He drove this road for 11 years. He knew every curve and grade and painted line. He was careful, he was thorough. Say he noticed things other people missed, and he documented them, and he kept going even when going was dangerous. He just ran out of road. I put his father's watch in my palm and closed my fingers around it. Then I walked back to my car. The coffee was still warm in the thermos on the passenger seat. I'd made it before I left that morning. I hadn't let it go cold. I drove home through the uncertain spring light, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. Someone told me once that the hardest part of grief isn't the absence. It's learning to carry the weight of everything unfinished and decide what to do with it. If you're here, watching at whatever hour it is where you are, doing laundry or sitting in your car or lying awake when you should be sleeping, thank you. These stories matter because you let them matter. There's another one waiting for you.